Hi, welcome back to our lecture. I wanted to give you the opportunity to do a second hands-on segment related to CloudFormation because, again, we will use CloudFormation in pretty much every project for the remainder of this class because CloudFormation is the technology which we use to define infrastructure as code. And it's really important that you become comfortable creating infrastructure with code. So let's take a look at a second example. I'm still in CloudFormation and the CloudFormation web console, and I'm going to create another stack. I guess before I do that, let's take a quick look at the template file that I'm going to use. And in this particular template, we are creating a VPC with a subnet, routing table, route, internet gateway, and we're launching an EC2 instance into the subnet, which is a public subnet. We also create a security group, which will allow traffic in on port 80, HTTP port 80 to the web server that we're launching on the EC2 instance. So this is a much more complete template in the sense that it has a dozen or more different resources defined within the template. And again, the template is just one big JSON object that starts with that curly bracket. And our first key is the AWS template format version with the corresponding value. That's how we start every template that we create. This template has a parameters section, and in the parameters section, we have a parameter called instance type. And that instance type is a string which has a default value of t2.micro. So we're using this parameter to specify what type of EC2 instance we want to launch. And there are two allowed values that we can select from, either t2 micro or t2 medium. Then the next section is the resources section, which again, every single template you create must have a resources section with at least one resource defined. We've got a class VPC resource here defined. You can see the type is AWS EC2 VPC, and it has a number of properties. The most important property here is the seeder block, and the value of which is 10.0.0.0/16. You might be asking yourself the question, well, how do I know what properties to define for any given resource? And the answer to that is that you simply need to look at the AWS documentation. I have created well over 100 CloudFormation templates, and I don't commit these all these properties and attributes to memory. I don't have them all memorized. I have to look at the documentation as I'm going along and building the template. You'll find that some properties may be required. You may have to specify a value for that property, while other properties are optional, and those properties may already have a default value specified. You see the next resource here is an internet gateway. Of course, if we want our VPC to be able to communicate out to the internet, we have to have an internet gateway. We also need to attach that gateway to the VPC. We use a VPC gateway attachment resource to do that, and that has two properties, one of which is referencing. This is using the ref function, referencing the internet gateway resource that we created above. And the other property is referencing the class VPC resource that we used above. Now, when you're using something like the web console and you create an internet gateway, if you recall, you create the internet gateway, and then you have to attach that gateway to the VPC. So these resources are sort of duplicating that sort of, or replicating that sort of process that you follow when you're exercising the web console, and essentially doing the same thing. We have a public route table that we're setting up here, and that's referencing the class VPC. We've got a public route, which is going to route everything out to the internet through the internet gateway. So we're referencing our public routing table, saying that we want to create this route in the routing table, and we want to set up and we want the traffic to route out through the internet gateway. We have the subnet that's set up here as well, that's also referencing the VPC. You can see how a lot of these VPC-based resources are all sort of tied back to the VPC we are creating via these references. The public subnet has its own CEDAR block. Remember, it's a partition. We're partitioning the network address space within the VPC. We also have a value for the availability zone, which is sort of determined dynamically using this select function. We have a public subnet association, which will associate that public routing table that we created with the public subnet. Again, these are all things that you do in the web console when you're pointing and clicking and you're associating a routing table with a subnet. This is the exact same process. We're just doing it programmatically. And next, we define a web server. This is an EC2 instance. For the instance type, we reference that property that we're defining at the beginning of the template. And this is how you can dynamically determine some of the resource configurations at stack deployment time, because you have the opportunity to select the value for that parameter, and the value that you select will then be used as the value for this particular property in the web server configuration. We have an image ID that we're specifying. The subnet, we're referencing the public subnet that that's also being created in the template. The web server is associated with the security group, which we'll see next. And then we've got some metadata tag, a metadata tag basically to specify a name for the EC2 instance. And next we have a web server security group that we're creating. You can see the type is AWS EC2 security group. Remember, this name here, this web server SG name, that's a logical name. That's a name that I invented. So I'm providing this name to the template. And this is just a way for me to reference some particular resource that the template is creating. So this doesn't have to have a specific name. Whereas the types all have very specific names. And you'll find those in the AWS documentation, the reference materials. So we're creating the web server security group, we're referencing the VPC once again, and we are defining a security group ingress set of rules. In this case, there's only one rule, which is allowing TCP traffic incoming from port 80, and the source of that is anywhere. So it's basically in an internet. We're allowing all HTTP traffic into the security group from the internet. The next and final section of the template is the outputs section. And in the outputs section, we have an output attribute called web URL that is going to have a value that is going to contain the web server public IP address. So we're using the get attribute function here to get the public IP of the web server. So once CloudFormation launches the web server, it will grab the resulting public IP, which has been assigned to that EC2 instance, and it will plug it in here in this output value. And there's also a join being done. So we're joining this HTTP :/ string with the resulting public IP address. And that's going to be our output value. So let's go ahead and spin up a stack. This template is stored in S3, and I copied that to my clipboard. And so I'm going to provide the S3 URL and then click on Next. I'm going to give it a stack name. I'll just call it my web server stack. And here I can select the instance type, T2 micro or T2 medium. I'll just leave it on T2 micro. Click on Next. I could give it a tag if I wanted to, say project beta is my tag that I want to use. And then click on Next. And I can review all the options and say create stack. And when I say create stack, the CloudFormation will immediately begin trying to deploy all of the different resources in my stack. If I do a refresh here, you'll see there's create in progress. It's creating the class VPC and the internet gateway. And now the class VPC and internet gateway are complete. I just keep hitting refresh. Now it's creating the public route. I can also go to the resources tab and see all of the different resources that are being created. As I click on refresh, it tells me the status. So some of these resources are already completed, and some of the resources are still create in progress. And it should only take a few minutes to spin up this stack. You can see it's still creating resources. If I look at outputs, there's no output yet because the stack creation has not completed yet. It's launching a web server. Now the web server is complete. Let's see if there's an output yet. I'm just curious. Yep, there is an output. So since that web server the EC2 instance has completed, now it can output that value. You can see how it outputs this string with the public IP address for the web server. And now my stack is create complete. If I go to this output and click on this value, then we get the hi, I'm instance, and it gives me the instance ID. So that's just a little web application running on that instance that's responding back with some instance metadata just to let me know that the instance is up and running and it's responsive. So we've gone ahead and we've created an EC2 instance, a VPC and EC2 instance just using a CloudFormation stack. If I go to EC2, you'll see that I have an EC2 instance. I've got one instance running. And I'm running this in North Virginia, in US East 1. I've got an instance running web server 1. That was the instance where I clicked on the public IP address and it responded back with that little basic web response. Okay, so that's how you might create a more complex CloudFormation template, a more complex AWS environment. And that's more representative of the sorts of environments that we will create during this class. If I go back to the CloudFormation dashboard, then I can delete that stack. So I will select the stack, and I'll go ahead and click on the delete button, and I'll say delete stack. And now CloudFormation will go through and delete the EC2 instance. It'll terminate the instance, and it will delete all of the VPC resources, which is extremely handy. I mean, you know how difficult it is by now to try to manually clean up all of the different AWS resources that you've created. And the beauty of CloudFormation is that it knows exactly which resources were created, and it can clean all of those resources up for you automatically. I hope you enjoyed this second hands-on segment, and that you will begin to gain some confidence working with CloudFormation.